Hey there, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to recreate the beat we can hear in Coldplay's My Universe featuring BTS. So let me show you the end result. So my goal throughout this video is to share with you some music production techniques that you could use in your projects to achieve the sound that you are looking for. And after this video is done, I want to direct your attention to beatacademy.com, where you can take advantage of all the resources I have available for you there, as well as the professional guidance and mentorship opportunities there that can help you take your next step, not just with producing your music, but achieving success with the music that you are making. So visit beatacademy.com for more information and how I can help you do that. So let's go ahead and start with the drums. Now I'm going to start with an acoustic drum kit. I'm going to start by using Addictive Drums 2 by Excellent Audio. The reason why I'm starting here is because with an acoustic drum kit, with more of that organic, the ambience that comes with it, like with the overhead miking and the room mic and all the parameters that we can change with an acoustic drum kit, we can then layer that with other samples that can reinforce that. But I want to get the groove and feel just right, because that is just, if anything, more important than finding the right samples. So you don't want your programming or your drums to feel robotic and stiff. So let's go ahead, load our Addictive Drums 2 in our Midi track. And I'm going to start with using a vintage dry kit. Now, the reason why I'm going with vintage dry is because this has a synth wave type of feel, and or the drums themselves are disco because the beat itself, we're at 105 BPMs, so it's pretty straightforward. Boot tap, right? That's the straightforward beat. And I want the drums to be a bit dry. I don't want it bigger than life drums. And so I found that the vintage dry kit with Addictive Drum 2 is a great place to start. Then you can go inside the kit and adjust the different cymbals or snares and kind of go through and change the kit around till you get the right type of sound that you're looking for. So with that in mind, let's head over here and check out the pattern. So we have our kick, our snare, and then we have the hi-hats. Now notice that the hi-hats are two separate notes here on the piano roll. Now we can easily just shift one and put all of them there. But when you start to deal with acoustic drum kits, they have different velocity settings or different micings of certain instruments, such as this hi-hat. So you might choose another hi-hat note, and that will give a little bit of that difference in the nuance. So the bottom note, the C sharp, is a bit tighter than this one. And one thing to keep in mind as well is the velocity is going to be different. So the first note is going to be accented, while the second note is a bit weaker in response. So it won't be such as accented as the first note. And then we have the open hi-hat here. So that's the pattern. And then what we want to do is create some saturation. So the overdrive here from Ableton Live, we go to the audio effects folder under drive and color, choose overdrive. This is really going to give a lot of character to this drum kit. And now I'm going to use one of my favorite compressors to use on acoustic drum kits is the UAD DBX 160. You can also find this plugin by Waves as well. It could just messing around with the parameters, maybe changing it a little bit. You can get right to the same type of sound. But love this compressor for this reason, just getting the right amount of smack from the drums. Now that we have that nice crunchy and really smacking that snare drum, let's go ahead and have an EQ. And what we're going to do is carve out the low end. and that's going to give some space for our foreground layer. So think of this drum beat as your main groove, main element there. And then we're going to layer that with a heavier kick and snare that's going to have those two elements at the forefront of the beat. All right, so now I've got a drum rack loaded in another MIDI track here, and we've got two samples. We've got our kick drum here, and we have a snare drum sample. Then I'm choosing to go with a vintage DMX snare because it has that boxy noise to it. Something that's very prevalent in a lot of the vintage drum machine samples, especially around the 80s. And when I listen to the reference, it has that synthwave drum type of vibe. Very disco synthwave, simple, but when I heard the snare, I was like, yeah, this will feel good. So now, on top of the snare drum, I want to insert a reverb to give it some more space. And that's going to really create a nice atmosphere around that snare drum. And then with this kick drum, well, let's go ahead and hear what it sounds like with the acoustic drum kit. So it does a good job of just beefing up and layering it. One thing I'm going to do is go to that kick drum and add a saturator to it. Add a little bit more harmonic saturation to the kick drum. Now it's all about the small details because they compound and add to the big picture. So one way to add a lot of the nuances in, especially with the live acoustic drums when you're programming them, is layering loops with them so that they can add a lot of the ghost notes and nuances and just the overall texture that you feel sometimes could be missing from your drums. So here I have a disco loop. I've used this a couple times throughout this channel. So what I want to do is just use an EQ to just carve out all that low end and just focus on this energy here, the hi-hats and the mid-range. And it's really that shuffling hi-hat rhythm that I'm interested in. It's all the things going on between the kick and snare. And so now layering that with the rest of the drums, you can definitely feel the difference when it's muted. When I mute the track, you feel it missing. And that's what I'm talking about. So it's not to be dominant, it's not to be really bright or way up front with the rest of the drums. It's just to be there and deliver the feel of the overall vibe that we're looking for. So I'm going to put this compressor on it, and we're going to sidechain, and we're going to look for our drum rack and choose our kick drum to be the source of the sidechain so that the loop now has a little bit more of pulse action going on. And that gives a little bit of that feel, that gallop a little bit to the drums. So let's go ahead and add some of those tom fills that we can hear on the turnarounds. So for this, I'm going to use another instance of Addicted Drums 2, but I'm choosing another drum kit here. I'm going with the Fairfax. This has a little bit more of that big room type of sound with the drums. So let's go ahead and just highlight the toms. And then we have this section here. So now what we want to do is add some overdrive similar to what we did with the first one. And we're going to implement some multi-band dynamics. I want to just compress specific frequencies on their own rather than just compress all the the toms together. And the reason for this is, let's say I wanted a little bit more of the mid-range to stick out, or I wanted less of the higher end, maybe tapping of the sticks on the toms to be less. That's why the multi-band works great, because I can focus on specific frequencies and tuck that down. So you can see here, without the multi-band, definitely got a lot more of that the top, right? The sticks hitting the toms. And this is kind of dulling them a little bit more. And then some reverb inserted right onto the toms. It gives it a little bit more decay time. That gives it that nice larger than life feel. Now, throughout the drum groove, I was just hearing something faint in the back. I thought it was a go-go bells, but then I was like, maybe it could be triangle. I'm not really entirely sure, but I love the texture and the feel that it gave to the drums. And it was slightly hidden. So if you listen to the reference and you just focus in on the drums and more on the high-end percussion, it's faint. You can hear it, and it adds something to the overall drum groove. So I decided to go with a triangle and place that in specific areas. So here it is. And this is just a triangle loop that I just decided to just chop and place in on the right rhythmic patterns. So then once I had that set in place, I want to go ahead now and group all these drums together. And I like to have my foreground beat first. Now with all my drums grouped together, I'm going to call that my drum bus so that all the drums will get processed the same. So let's start with some compression. Now I'm going to compress this to squeeze all the drums together and really get more of a tight performance. Without the compressor, things just feel really isolated. Everything feels singled out, the kick, the snare. And so what we're doing is we're using the glue compressor. I have it set to 2-to-1 ratio. I'm not applying a lot of the strength of the compressor and just messing with the attack till I get the right type of punch in this. So we've got the attack set on 3 and a pretty quick release. Now, a lot of the heavy lifting for the texture, the tone, and overall punchiness is now going to come from the drum bus plugin in Ableton Live. So what's going on here, we're adding some saturation, we're adding drive, we're adding some mid-frequency crunch. We're also damping the EQ to warm it up a little bit. But this transient knob, really powerful and we're going to use it creatively in our arrangement. So even throughout the verses, what I'll do is I'll turn the transient knob to the left, creating more emphasis on the attack. So this is more attack, less sustain, right? So it's going to, you'll get just more focus on the initial attacks of the kick and the snare. Just think of it like this. It's going to be more choppier or less decay when the transient knob is to the left, and it's going to have a lot more body when you turn it to the right. I'm also going to give a little bit of that low subharmonic frequency by increasing the boom. And then I'm just adjusting the dry and wet till I find a really good balance here. So about 65 is. Now let's EQ this. Now the EQ is going to make much more sense in the context of adding everything else in there. But for right now, I wanted to eliminate some of that boxiness. And just crisp it up by boosting some of the high end there. And another form of compression, believe it or not, is using digital distortion. So I've got Ableton Live's Redux here just to add some grit, but it's also, when I'm downgrading the bits, it is doing some form of compression to the drum. So very subtle, but I like what it's doing. And then I'm using the Slate Digital vintage tape machine just to kind of smooth and round everything off. All right, now let's start working on the pads and the overall synths that we hear throughout the chorus. So for this, I'm going to start by using Ableton Live's wavetable, but any 2 or more oscillator synth that you're using your DAW will work just fine. Obviously, we've got that nice synth wave, that 80s classic big chorusy type of synth. So I'm going to start with a sawtooth because it's going to get us that type of tone and texture that we're looking for. The sine wave is going to be too dull, and square, it's just not going to get the right type of texture we're looking for. So sawtooth right here. We'll set oscillator 1 to that. And let's go ahead and listen to the chords. So it's a bit brittle. So let's soften this up. Let's turn oscillator 2 on. Also put that to a sawtooth, and we'll slightly detune this. And now what we're going to do is use our filter frequency to just change it from being a brittle synth to nice and smooth, and give some resonance there. Now what we want to do is route that filter frequency over to our envelope 2. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's just put a little bit of that there, maybe just 27. And you see now we're adding movement to the filter frequency. So let's just adjust the envelope for that. I'll bring the sustain down, and we're going to increase the decay so there's a little bit of time after that filter opens up. And then let's go ahead and turn on the unison. So we'll set this over to the shimmer mode here and maybe increase the voices to see what that sounds like. Now I want to head over to the amp envelope because this is going to shape the body of the synth. And let's just increase the attack because we don't need it to be so abrupt at first. We'll lower the sustain and open up the decay. And bring this down a little bit. Now let's go to oscillator 2 and just lower the mix of this. And now let's add some delay. So I'm going to use the echo plugin here, drag and drop that. And we'll leave it just the way it is at every 8th note. Let's go into the built-in filter here and just cut off some of the low end. I'm going to bring the filter frequency down a bit. And then let's add some reverb. This is a great way to add some space. I'm going to use the hybrid reverb here because there's a specific algorithm that I like using, and that is the shimmer, in which it'll add a layer of an octave. It's going to pitch up the actual reverb signal a whole octave up. So yeah, made sure that the pitch is set to 12 semitones higher, brought the shimmer up here, and just dialed the dry and wet a little bit. So I went ahead and duplicated our first synth with the wavetable, delay, and reverb, and that's what we have here. So we're still using 2 oscillators set to a sawtooth, and maybe just changing a little bit of the parameters here, going instead of from shimmer to classic on the unison, and making this a little bit brighter. And what's happening is we're going to accent this specific moment in the chord progression. So if we play both of them together, I'll go ahead and nudge these over a little bit using Command U. But you see, it really helps to accent certain. Now I'm not layering the whole thing. I didn't copy this and put an octave higher. What I'm specifically and strategically doing is just accenting certain chords of the progression. This is something that you can do to help certain notes stand out. And this is very helpful when there's a melody sitting on top and you and low and then you can accent certain points of the phrasing of the melody and it just brings it and lifts it up. So that's something to consider, using accent notes or accent chords with another synth or another sound to really help bring more spotlight and attention to those specific moments in the phrase. I'm also putting the delay, left it there, and also using the reverb as well. Same settings with the shimmer. And now what we're going to do is just group these two together and create a synth bus. Now let's go ahead and focus in on the bass. So we're going to deal with the bass and break it into 3 different layers. We're going to have our sub bass, just managing a lot of the low end. Then we're going to have a synth bass on top of that, maybe just another layer so we get a bit of that chorusy wide effect. And then we have a slide bass that happens for the purpose, just like what we did with the synths, to accent certain rhythmic parts. So let's start with our first bass layer, which is going to be the synth bass. And this is using the wavetable again, set to 2 oscillators. Oscillator 1 and 2 are set both to a sawtooth. And what I'm doing is I'm making sure that I map my filter frequency, going over here to the matrix, and mapping that to envelope 2. I've got it set to about 53. So the more or the higher the number is on the that you assign it to the envelope, the more impact that envelope has on that parameter, such as the frequency cutoff. So envelope 2, we've got a nice little swell here, but we've got a long decay. We got a short one. So I want that nice long decay. Lowered the sustain and brought up the release. And just bringing the filter down to a point where it's getting the sound that we're looking for. So I'm bringing the filter right around here. Now, Unison Mode, I set that to classic, and I made sure to go from polyphonic to mono so that we're not getting any overlaps with the bass notes. But just messing around with the classic Unison Mode, so I got a nice wide sound with the bass. And I love this sound. Love using this as a great layer. We hear it a lot in the 1975. A lot of indie pop uses this type of sound. So I'm going to go ahead and put an EQ after that. I'm going to take all that low end away. And the reason for that is because I'm now going to have a sub layer that'll handle all that low end. And a little bit more chorus. And some reverb right after that. So right next to that is our sub. And this is a very simple, just one oscillator set to a sine wave. And just copying the same notes. Now, if you're listening on laptop speakers, you're probably not going to hear it. So you might want to use your headphones or studio monitors. But this is straightforward. Set it from polyphonic to mono, sine wave. And then we're using some harmonic saturation, such as the amp simulator, just to really boost up the saturation of the low end and get some drive there. And then using an EQ to just take away some of the high end that we're not using. And a compressor is at the end just to hit the initial attack of that sub and just let the body become more dominant. Now we have the slide bass, which is a really cool, ear candy moment here in this song. So let me go ahead and play it from the beginning with everything. So to my attention, what I thought about was someone just sliding an electric bass and slapping it, so to speak. So it's got this slide slap bass thing going on. So I decided to go with the Moto bass. I set it to the 70s P bass model. And under play style, instead of the finger, I went over to slap. What's cool is you can set the threshold so it's not over dramatic or drastic. So you can determine how drastic the slapping is going to be. And right after that, we're taking the low end away from the using the EQ to do that, saturating it just a bit. And here's the kicker, is that chorus. That's what gives it that wide, larger than life type of sound. So we're going to maybe increase the width a little bit. Just a slight compression to just even it out. And then I'm going to use this sidechain. Let's go over here to our drum rack and choose our kick drum to sidechain this. And the purpose for that is that the first initial slide or bend is not going to be at the forefront. that bam, that's going to be the highlight there. So let me show you what's going on in the MIDI because this is important. So initially you have just the octave, the A to A, the C sharp to C sharp, the B to B, and then in here you want to go to your envelope mode and choose your pitch bend. What I decided to do was just draw in that pitch bend just by automation of the region. And that's how we're getting that response. And then lastly, we have the electric guitar part that I decided to go ahead and play myself using my Fender Tele that I have here in the studio. So just walk you through some of the settings for that. So here is the guitar part dry with no effects. Not the greatest player in the world, but it works. And so I'm using the amp simulator here in Ableton Live, setting it over to clean. And then the cabinet helps round that off with a little bit of delay. And the EQ here. And I just love the way chorus, a simple chorus plugin sounds on a muted guitar part. I mean, just takes me straight to, the Toto and earlier Michael Jackson records and a lot of those earlier funk records with a muted guitar. And I love the texture of just a simple chorus plugin on muted guitar. So let's see what it sounds like with everybody together. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. And as my gift to you for watching this video, I'd love to send you a sample pack loaded with loops, one-shots, samples that you can use in your projects, 100% royalty-free, and it's yours absolutely free. Just click the link below in the description box or visit beatacademy.com/pack. You can also have access to this Ableton Live session and many other Ableton Live sessions from videos on this channel. Now, if you're serious about wanting to take your next step with producing your music, or you're looking for professional guidance and mentorship opportunities with helping you take that next step, then I want to encourage you to visit beatacademy.com and take advantage of all the resources that I have available for you there. Once again, be sure to subscribe and like this video so you can stay up to date with upcoming videos that I'll be releasing soon. And I'll see you at beatacademy.com. Take care.